おはようございます。おはようございます。
おはようございます。
あ、おはよう。おはようございます。
おはようございます。あら、こんにちは。しんちゃん。こんにちは。
こんにちは。
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 こんにちは。こんにちは。
こんにちは。
こんにちは。
The pronunciation of Japanese is simple. There are only 5 vowels.
あ、え、い、お、う。
There are not a few indigenous Japanese words consisting of one consonant plus one vowel, or even words made up of vowels only. In most longer words, vowels and consonants usually occur alternately. Here are some examples of Japanese greetings. Good morning is
おはよ
good afternoon is
う。こんにちは。
goodbye is
さようなら。
Experts agree that Japanese is almost an isolated language, although certain aspects can be traced to some Altaic and Malayo-Polynesian language groups. Many grammatical rules resemble those of Korean, Mongolian, and even Turkish. At the same time, the use of vowel sounds to end words indicates Japanese is related to Polynesian languages. It can thus be said that Japanese is a unique offspring of two different language families. These earthenware figurines, called haniwa, date back to the 4th century AD. In those early days, Japanese had no written form whatsoever. Yet the language was highly expressive in its oral tradition. Profuse literary works, including myths and poetry, had been handed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. It was during the 4th century that Chinese characters were introduced from the Asian continent. These are ideographs, each having a particular meaning and pronunciation. Chinese characters were originally hieroglyphic symbols or pictorial representations of specific objects. For example, this is the Chinese character meaning horse. Archaeological studies have revealed how this character was derived from a schematic drawing of a horse. And this is how the character for bird was developed. note the gradual changes that took place. This example is easier to see. A character developed from the human ear. So is this character, meaning eye, although it stands upright. There are usually two ways of reading a Chinese character in Japanese. One is the phonetic reading based upon the original Chinese pronunciation. The other, the Japanese reading of the word having the same meaning. For instance, the Chinese character for boat is pronounced shu in the phonetic reading and hune in the Japanese rendering. Likewise, the character for hair is mo in the Chinese reading and ke in the Japanese. In this way, Chinese characters were gradually adapted into a written form for the Japanese language. In addition, the characters were further adapted over the centuries into two sets of phonograms to express all the basic sounds of the language. The more cursive set, called hiragana, used all the elements of a character. The other, known as katakana, used only a part. Thus was developed a syllabary of 48 letters, either in hiragana, shown here in green, or katakana, shown in yellow. To be able to read or write Japanese today, one needs only to remember these 48 syllabic letters, and about 1,800 of the most frequently used Chinese characters. The syllabic letters had come into general use by the 10th century. However, hiragana letters were chiefly utilized by women in those days. At the same time, men wrote everything in classical Chinese. Both literate men and women tried to excel in calligraphy or good penmanship. A fine handwriting was in itself a work of art. This tradition has survived to this day, a recent offshoot of calligraphy being the avant-garde abstraction, sumi painting. Japan's literary tradition had one of its earliest written expressions in the tale of Genji. This long romantic novel, now known to the world through translations, was written by a court lady in Kyoto early in the 11th century. This novel, in its original form, consists of 54 volumes. The emotional beauty of the novel has also been set forth in this famous set of picture scrolls. Through selected passages and illustrations, these scrolls, like the novel itself, depict the lives of medieval aristocrats and open to us the delicate feelings and sentiments of the men and women of that age. A literary achievement at the imperial court of those early days was the perfection of the traditional Japanese poetic form of phrases of 5 and 7 syllables. "100 poems of this type became so popular centuries ago that they were arranged into a special card game. It is still popular today as a pastime for the New Year holidays. The player must recognize the poem being read and select the card bearing the last 2 phrases. This is one way in which the literature of the past is transmitted to the youth of today. The beauty of nature that inspired those 11th century poets has changed little during the ensuing 900 years. Even today, when Japanese has evolved into a fully competent modern language, it still retains that depth of expressiveness that the poets of old had polished over the passing centuries. Yasunari Kawabata, winner of the Nobel Prize for Literature for 1968, is the inheritor of this rich literary tradition. He is a recognized master of describing the traditional aesthetic sensibilities of the people in a refined contemporary style. Japanese is usually written in vertical lines and from right to left. It can also be written in horizontal lines running from left to right. Another feature of written Japanese is that it is composed of Chinese characters and the syllabic letters. Ideographs among the phonograms save space and heighten the visual effect. In Japanese, the predicate part of a sentence always comes at the end. For example, inu ga is the subject, meaning the dog, and neteimasu, or is sleeping, is the verb. To make an interrogative sentence, the simple particle or sound ka is merely placed after the verb. No change in word order is necessary. In Japan today, the entire nation of 100 million people speaks and reads one and the same language. Although dialects exist, the standard language is understood throughout the land.
私は窓口からお辞儀をしました。汽車は次第に速力を増して、見送りの人たちの顔がみるみるうちに小さくなっていきます。その時です。ワン、ワン、ワンという声が聞こえてきました。黒です。汽車の後を追って。
One particular aspect of the language taught in all schools is calligraphy. The students are disciplined in the proper way of handling the writing brush, as well as in the stroke order of each character or letter. They thus carry on the tradition of their ancestors.
この長さとこうよく揃えないと、ね、どこからこれが入ったらいいかっていうのを入れないと字が入りきれなくなるんですよ。で、ひらがなの方は少し小さめ。
私は本を取ります。
More and more foreigners are taking an interest in learning Japanese. Here, a private conversation drill is in progress.
本を置きます。私は何をしますか？
あなたは本を置きます。
どうぞあなたは本を取ってください。何をしますか？
私は本を取ります。
それでは今日は漢字の練習をしましょう。これから
These are advanced students tackling the reading and writing of Chinese characters.
はいよ。もう一度大きな声で。はいよ。それではこれは何と読みますか？試練。 これは今度は書き取りの練習をしましょう。リョンパイニョさんにソムタクさん、黒板に太陽という字を書いてください。
A mammoth tanker nearing completion. A knowledge of Japanese is an indispensable aid for this engineer from abroad in learning Japan's modern shipbuilding technology.
だいぶできてきましたね。
ブロック溶接が終わると進水します。30万トンの船で実艦室で完成します。
早くできますね。
ええ。
この枝は前正面に低く引き出して。
Ikebana, or flower arrangement, is one of Japan's traditional cultural arts. Through handling the flowers, the student learns both the art and the language. On many of Japan's university and college campuses, foreigners are regularly enrolled members of the student body. Thanks to the intensive course in Japanese they have taken, they can fully enjoy life at school and in the local community. To these young people, a knowledge of Japanese is bringing them a deeper understanding of this land and its people, and opening to them a door to the centuries of tradition and beauty, which is the heritage of the language of Japan.